The weathered fence posts of Willow Creek Farm stood as silent witnesses to 4 generations of Wilson family struggles and triumphs. They had seen prosperous harvests and devastating droughts, joyful celebrations and heartbreaking losses. But nothing in the farm's long history could have prepared anyone for what Bailey, a seemingly ordinary border collie with extraordinary instincts, would unearth from the soil of the North pasture. A discovery that would soon turn this modest Pennsylvania farm into the center of international attention and force historians to question everything they thought they knew about American history. While most dogs dig for buried bones or chase after burrowing creatures, Bailey's persistent excavation of the same unusual spot would lead her owner, Thomas Wilson, to uncover an object that defied conventional explanation. The metal box Bailey discovered wasn't just an interesting historical curiosity. It was about to shatter the foundations of accepted history, challenge our understanding of early American technology, and reveal a secret that had remained buried for centuries. This is the remarkable true story of how one farmer's loyal companion changed our understanding of the past forever. Thomas Wilson wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the parched fields of Willow Creek Farm. The evening sun cast long shadows across land that had been in his family since his great-grandfather. Patrick Wilson had purchased it with everything he owned back in 1887. The 175 acres of rolling western Pennsylvania countryside had once been among the most productive in Oak Ridge County, known for corn that grew taller than a man and pumpkins that won ribbons at the state fair. But the past 3 years had brought nothing but hardship. Erratic weather patterns had decimated his crops. First too much rain that flooded the lower fields, then punishing heat waves that baked the soil into a cracked, dusty crust. The old red barn needed a new roof, the irrigation system required costly repairs, and the property taxes kept climbing despite his dwindling income. The bank's latest notice lay crumpled in his pocket. The words "final warning" and "foreclosure proceedings" still burning in his mind. At 53, Tom's weathered face carried the lines of a man who had spent his life working outdoors, his hands calloused from decades of physical labor. The farm wasn't just his livelihood, it was his heritage, his identity. The thought of being the Wilson who finally lost it kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the same bedroom where he'd been born over half a century ago. "Come on, Bailey," he called to his border collie, who was sitting attentively at the edge of the oak grove that marked the northern boundary of the property. "Let's head back. Got to figure out how we're going to make it through another month." Bailey was unlike any dog Tom had ever owned. The 5-year-old border collie had come into his life as a puppy, a gift from Eleanor Jackson, the local veterinarian and Tom's childhood friend. "This one's special," Ellie had said when she brought the small black and white bundle to the farm. "She's got something in her eyes, like she understands more than she should." Those words had proven prophetic. Bailey didn't just herd the few remaining cattle with impressive skill. She seemed to anticipate problems before they happened. She would bark at weak spots in the fence before they broke, lead Tom to equipment that needed maintenance before it failed, and somehow, always, knew when to comfort him during his darkest moments. But lately, Bailey's behavior had changed. For the past 3 weeks, she had developed an obsession with a particular spot in the North pasture, near the ancient oak grove that local legend claimed was sacred to the indigenous people who had inhabited the land centuries before European settlers arrived. Each morning after breakfast, she would race to that same spot and begin digging feverishly, only stopping when Tom called her away. At first, he had assumed she was after a groundhog or perhaps had found a fox den, but her persistence was unusual, even for a dog as determined as Bailey. And there was something different about the way she dug, not the frantic scrabbling of a dog chasing prey, but methodical, purposeful excavation. as if she knew exactly what she was looking for. This evening, as they walked back to the farmhouse, Bailey resisted, turning back toward the oak grove and barking with unusual urgency. "Not now, girl," Tom sighed. "It's getting dark, and I've got bills to sort through." The white farmhouse, with its wraparound porch, had once been the pride of the Wilson family. Tom's grandfather had added the porch, his father had modernized the kitchen, and Tom himself had renovated the old study into a home office where he now spent hours trying to make sense of the farm's increasingly desperate financial situation. As he settled at his desk, the spreadsheet on his computer screen painted a grim picture. Even if he sold the remaining cattle and took out another loan against the farm equipment, he would still fall short of what he needed to keep the bank at bay. He was considering taking a part-time job in town, though the very idea felt like a betrayal of his commitment to the farm. A soft whine drew his attention to Bailey, who sat in the doorway watching him with concerned eyes. "I know, girl," he said softly. "I'm worried too." That night, as rain pattered against the roof, Tom dreamed of his grandfather. In the dream, the old man stood by the oak grove, pointing toward the ground and saying something Tom couldn't quite hear. He woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in his mind, to find Bailey absent from her usual spot at the foot of his bed. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean, the rising sun painting the wet fields in golden light. Tom found Bailey exactly where he expected, at her digging spot near the oak grove. But this time, something was different. She wasn't digging. Instead, she stood rigidly at attention, staring down at the mud-slicked hole she had created, barking once when she saw Tom approaching. "What is it, Bailey? What have you found?" As Tom drew closer, he could see that the overnight rain had washed away more soil, revealing something in the hole that reflected the early morning light. A corner of what appeared to be a metal box protruded from the earth. Curious, Tom knelt and down, ignoring the mud soaking into his jeans. Bailey watched intently as he brushed away more soil with his hands, gradually exposing more of the object. It wasn't a rusty old can or discarded farm equipment as he had first suspected. The surface was smooth and unmarked by corrosion, despite having been buried in the damp Pennsylvania soil for who knew how long. "What in the world?" Tom murmured as he continued to dig around the object. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful excavation to free the box from its earthen prison. It was roughly the size of a small suitcase, made of a metal that looked like silver but felt too light to be solid silver. The most striking feature was the lack of visible seams or conventional hinges. The entire surface was covered with intricate engravings, flowing patterns and symbols that resembled no writing system Tom recognized. Bailey sat beside him, her tail sweeping slowly across the damp ground, eyes never leaving the box. "Good girl," Tom said, patting her head. "Whatever this is, you found it." He tried to open the box but could find no latch or lock. The engraving seemed to flow across the surface in patterns that almost suggested a mechanism, but if there was a way to open it, it wasn't immediately obvious. Tom's first thought was to call Eleanor. If anyone in Oak Ridge would have sensible advice about an unusual discovery, it would be Ellie. With her scientific background and level head, she might know what to make of this strange object. Carrying the surprisingly lightweight box back to the farmhouse, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that his grandfather's dream and Bailey's discovery were somehow connected. The old man had been fascinated by local history, collecting artifacts found on the farm and spinning tales about the land's past that most people dismissed as fanciful. What if some of those stories had been true? Dr. Eleanor Jackson arrived at Willow Creek Farm within the hour, her green pickup truck bouncing up the gravel driveway. At 48, Ellie had the practical demeanor of someone who dealt with emergencies on a regular basis. Her dark hair was streaked with grey and pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements efficient as she climbed out of the truck. "This better be good, Tom Wilson," she called as she approached the porch where he waited. "I rescheduled, Mrs. Hoffman's prize, Persian for you." When Tom showed her the box, Ellie's professional composure slipped. "My God," she whispered, running her fingers over the engravings. "Where did you find this?" "Bailey found it," Tom corrected, nodding toward the Border Collie, who hadn't left the box's side since they brought it to the house. "Been trying to show me for weeks, apparently." Ellie examined the box carefully, her scientific curiosity evident in her methodical approach. "These markings, they're like nothing I've seen before, and the metal itself, it's not tarnished or corroded. How long do you think it's been buried?" "No idea. Could be recent, I suppose, but..." Tom hesitated. "My grandfather used to talk about the original inhabitants of this land, said they had knowledge that was lost when the European settlers came. Most people thought he was just spinning yarns, but he believed it." Ellie looked up sharply. "You think this might be Native American in origin? Some of these symbols do have a vague resemblance to petroglyph patterns, but they're so precise, so engineered." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What should I do?" Tom asked. "Take it to the historical society in town?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "I have a better idea. My cousin Robert is a professor of archaeology at State University. This is exactly the kind of thing he studies. I can call him, see if he'd be willing to take a look." Tom nodded slowly. The last thing he needed was another distraction from the farm's pressing problems, but the mystery of the box had captured his imagination. "Okay, but let's keep this quiet for now. The last thing I need is curiosity seekers trampling my fields." Little did Tom know that within days, the quiet privacy of Willow Creek Farm would become a distant memory, and the strange metal box would change not just his life, but our understanding of American history itself. Professor Robert Daniels arrived the following afternoon. As Eleanor's cousin, he shared her practical approach, but his academic background gave him a different perspective. Tall and lanky, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually curious expression, he carried himself with the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind was always partially occupied with scholarly matters. "Extraordinary," he murmured, examining the box that Tom had placed on the kitchen table. "The craftsmanship is remarkable. These engravings aren't just decorative, they appear to be functional." He traced one of the flowing patterns with his finger. "See how they interconnect? Almost like a circuit diagram, but organic in design." Bailey remained nearby, watching the proceedings with unusual intensity. "Any idea how to open it?" Tom asked. Robert shook his head. "Not immediately, but I'd like to document these patterns. Before we attempt anything, with your permission, I'd like to take some photographs and measurements." Over the next few hours, the professor meticulously documented every aspect of the box, occasionally murmuring to himself or making notes in a small leather-bound journal. His excitement grew visibly as he worked. "Tom," he said finally, setting down his camera, "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but if this is what I think it might be, you've made an incredible discovery. These patterns share characteristics with certain ancient writing systems, but the precision and complexity suggest a level of technological understanding that shouldn't have existed in pre-colonial America." "What are you saying?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward. "I'm saying we need more experts." Robert's eyes gleamed with academic excitement. "I'd like to bring in a colleague, Dr. Sophia Chen. She specializes in ancient writing systems and symbolic languages. And perhaps Michael Kovacs from the Technology Analysis Department. His expertise might help us understand the function of these engravings. Tom hesitated, looking around his modest kitchen. I don't know about turning my farm into a research center. I've got enough problems without... He was interrupted by Bailey, who suddenly placed her paw directly on one of the engravings and let out a soft whine. To everyone's astonishment, a faint humming sound emanated from the box, and one section of the engravings began to glow with a subtle blue light. "Did you see that?" Eleanor gasped. The glow faded almost immediately, but the brief reaction had transformed the atmosphere in the room. Whatever they were dealing with, it was far from ordinary. "Tom," Robert said quietly, "I don't think you have a choice anymore. This discovery, it could be historically significant beyond anything we can imagine. Whatever's inside that box has been waiting to be found, perhaps for centuries. Don't you want to know what it is?" Tom looked at Bailey, who seemed unusually calm now, as if satisfied that her mission was finally being understood. Then he thought of his grandfather's stories, dismissed by so many as mere folklore. Perhaps the old man had been right all along. "All right," he said finally, "bring in your experts, but this is still my farm and I want some control over what happens here." Robert nodded solemnly. "Of course. This is your discovery after all, Bailey's and yours." Within 2 days, Willow Creek Farm had transformed. A canopy tent had been erected near the discovery site, filled with equipment brought by the university team. Dr. Sophia Chen, a brilliant linguist with a specialty in ancient communication systems, arrived with an array of reference materials and scanning equipment. Michael Kovacs, whose background included both historical artifact analysis and modern engineering, brought devices that could analyze the metal composition without damaging the box. The farmhouse kitchen became an impromptu conference room, with laptops, documents, and coffee cups covering every surface. Tom watched with a mixture of amazement and unease as his quiet farm became the center of intense academic activity. The metal alloy is unlike anything I've seen in artifacts from this period and region, Michael explained during one of their evening briefings. It contains elements that are familiar, but the composition and manufacturing technique, they're advanced. Too advanced for the technology that should have existed here in the 18th century. Sophia nodded in agreement. And these symbols combine elements from multiple known writing systems, but they're structured in a way that suggests they're not just symbolic representation, but functional components. Almost like code rather than language. "Any progress on opening it?" Tom asked, the practical farmer in him still focused on tangible results. "We believe the engravings themselves are the key," Robert replied. "They appear to be a complex locking mechanism that responds to specific touch patterns. Bailey triggered something yesterday, but we haven't been able to replicate it exactly." As if hearing her name, Bailey trotted into the kitchen and directly to the box, which was now surrounded by scanning equipment. The researchers had learned to pay attention when the Border Collie showed interest in their work. "She wants to show us something," Tom said, recognizing the dog's purposeful demeanor. The team gathered around as Bailey placed her paw carefully on one of the engravings, then looked expectantly at Tom. "I think she wants you to do the same," Eleanor suggested. Feeling slightly foolish but trusting his dog's instincts, Tom placed his hand where Bailey had indicated. Nothing happened. "Try a different pressure," Sophia suggested. "These mechanisms can be sensitive." Tom adjusted his touch, pressing more firmly. Suddenly, the engraving beneath his fingers warmed, and the now familiar blue glow spread across the box's surface, following the intricate patterns like flowing water. A series of soft clicks emanated from within the box, and a previously invisible seam appeared along one edge. The room fell silent as the top of the box slowly lifted, revealing its contents for the first time in what they would later determine had been nearly 3 centuries. Inside the box lay an array of objects, meticulously arranged as if waiting for this moment. On top was a stack of parchments, yellowed with age but remarkably preserved. Beneath them, compartments held what appeared to be small tools, crafted from the same unusual metal as the box itself. But dominating the collection was a device unlike anything they had ever seen. A disc, approximately 8 inches in diameter, with concentric rings that appeared capable of rotation around a central axis. The entire object was covered with the same flowing engravings as the exterior of the box, but with additional inlaid materials that caught the light like gemstones, but appeared to be something else entirely. "This is impossible," Michael whispered, carefully lifting the disc for closer examination. "The engineering principles here, they're beyond 18th century capabilities, beyond 19th century capabilities even." Sophia had already begun examining the parchments, her trained eye scanning the writing that covered them. "The documents are multilingual," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "There's English here, but also Cherokee, what appears to be a variant of Algonquian, and something else I don't recognize." "Can you read any of it?" Tom asked, peering over her shoulder. "The English portions, yes. It appears to be a detailed account written by someone named Jonathan Stillwell in 1752. She continued reading, her expression growing increasingly astonished. According to this, Stillwell was a surveyor who encountered a group he refers to as the Keepers, apparently a secret society formed of both European settlers and indigenous people who had united to protect certain knowledge. Robert leaned closer. "Knowledge of what?" Sophia looked up, her eyes wide. "They called it the confluence, a merging of advanced European scientific concepts with indigenous understanding of natural systems. But the level of technology described here, it shouldn't have existed, not then." Bailey, who had been sitting quietly beside Tom, suddenly perked up her ears and turned toward the window. A moment later, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Tom moved to the window and frowned. "We have company. Looks like Mayor Dawson and... Is that a news van?" Robert grimaced. "Word must have gotten out. Academic circles can be surprisingly leaky when something this significant emerges." "I thought we agreed to keep this quiet," Tom said, his voice hardening. "We did," Eleanor assured him. "But you can't expect something like this to stay secret for long. The university has protocols for significant discoveries." Before Tom could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mayor Patricia Dawson stood on the porch, her official smile firmly in place. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, including what appeared to be a reporter and cameraman from the local news station. "Tom Wilson," the mayor said warmly, "I've just heard the most fascinating news about a historical discovery on your property. The town council thought it would be appropriate if I came to see for myself what all the excitement is about." Tom glanced back at the kitchen, where the team was hurriedly securing the box and its contents. "This isn't a good time, Patricia. We're in the middle of some delicate research." The mayor's smile didn't waver. Of course. But you understand that a discovery of historical significance on private property within our jurisdiction is a matter of public interest, especially when it might put Oak Ridge on the map, so to speak." The implied message was clear. This was no longer just Tom's private affair. The community, led by its elected officials, was staking a claim to whatever prestige or benefits might come from the discovery. "We can give a brief statement," Robert said, joining Tom at the door. "But the research is at a critical stage. We need time and privacy to properly document and understand what we've found." The mayor nodded, but her eyes were already looking past them, trying to glimpse the activity inside. "Surely a few photographs for the local paper wouldn't hurt, and perhaps a preliminary statement about the nature of the discovery." Tom felt his control of the situation slipping away. This was still his home, his property, but suddenly everyone seemed to have a claim on what Bailey had found. The thought of the farm being overrun with curiosity seekers and media was deeply unsettling. Eleanor stepped forward, her professional demeanor taking over. "Mayor Dawson, as the only local resident among the research team, let me assure you that once we have properly secured and documented the find, Oak Ridge will be appropriately acknowledged. But premature publicity could compromise the integrity of the research." The standoff might have continued, but it was Bailey who changed the dynamic. The Border Collie slipped past Tom and approached the mayor. Her manner alert but friendly. She looked up at Patricia, then deliberately turned and walked a few steps toward the oak grove, looking back as if expecting the humans to follow. "Your dog seems to have something to show us," the mayor observed. Tom exchanged glances with Robert and Eleanor. "Maybe she does," he said slowly. "Mayor Dawson, would you and your associates be willing to see where the discovery was made, rather than the discovery itself? It might give you some context for your statement." The diversion worked. As Tom led the mayor and her entourage toward the ancient oak grove, explaining how Bailey had led him to the find, Robert and the research team secured the box and its remarkable contents in a university transport case designed for sensitive artifacts. By the time they returned to the house, the mayor had enough material for a preliminary press statement, focusing on the historical significance of the location, rather than the specific nature of what had been found. She left with promises to coordinate any future media interest through the university's public relations department, a compromise that gave Tom some breathing room. "That was quick thinking," Eleanor told him as they watched the vehicles depart. "But this is just the beginning. Once word gets out about what's in those documents." Tom nodded grimly. "I know. This isn't going to be just my problem much longer." That evening, as the research team continued their analysis in the makeshift lab they had established in Tom's barn, Bailey led her owner to the porch steps. They sat together in the gathering dusk, the dog leaning comfortably against the farmer's side, as they had done countless times before. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Tom said softly, scratching behind Bailey's ears. "Somehow you knew exactly where to dig, exactly what was waiting to be found." Bailey looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to understand more than any dog should. "My grandfather used to say that this land remembers," Tom continued, "that it holds onto its stories, waiting for the right person to listen." He gazed out at the oak grove, silvered now in the emerging moonlight. Maybe he was right. Maybe you could hear what the rest of us couldn't. Inside the barn, the research team was making remarkable progress. The parchments contained detailed accounts of a hidden history, a collaboration between forward-thinking European scientists and indigenous knowledge keepers that had begun in the early 1700s and continued for decades in secret. According to the documents, this coalition had developed technologies that combined principles of electricity, magnetism, and natural energy systems in ways that anticipated discoveries not formally recognized by mainstream science until much later. The disc-shaped device appeared to be a sophisticated navigational tool that could detect and map energy flows within the Earth itself, what the documents called the living currents of the land. Most astonishingly, the accounts suggested that similar devices and knowledge repositories had been hidden at specific locations across the continent, forming a network of sites chosen for their particular energy characteristics. Willow Creek Farm, with its ancient oak grove, was apparently one such site. "If these accounts are accurate," Robert explained to Tom when he rejoined them, "what Bailey found isn't just a historically significant artifact. It's evidence of an advanced technological understanding that existed in pre-industrial America, a collaboration between cultures that official history says were in conflict, not cooperation. Why hide it? Tom asked. If they had this knowledge, why not share it openly? Sophia looked up from the document she was translating. According to this passage, they believed that the knowledge could be dangerous if misused. They saw how European colonization was progressing, how indigenous peoples were being treated, and they feared that these technologies would become weapons rather than tools for understanding. So they created a secret society to protect it, Michael added. The Keepers, they called themselves. They hid their knowledge in plain sight, disguised as folklore and myth, while preserving the actual technologies and documentation in containers like this one, hidden at specific points across the land. Tom thought about his grandfathers, stories dismissed as mere superstition by most, and somehow the memory of these locations persisted, in stories, in the connection to the land, and apparently in the awareness of certain animals. Eleanor added, watching as Bailey moved purposefully among the research equipment, occasionally pausing to inspect particular instruments with curious attention. Bailey isn't just extraordinarily intelligent. She's sensitive to something we can barely perceive. The implications were staggering. If the documents were authentic, and every test they had run so far suggested they were, then the conventional understanding of early American history would need to be fundamentally revised. The neat categorizations of European technological superiority and indigenous primitive culture were revealed as not just inaccurate, but deliberately misleading. The truth was far more complex and fascinating. A hidden history of collaboration, innovation, and respect for the land that had been systematically erased from official records. As word of the discovery spread through academic channels, more experts began reaching out, requesting access to the site and the artifacts. Among them was a representative from Heritage Acquisitions Corporation, a private company known for purchasing historically significant items for wealthy collectors. Their offer to Tom was substantial, enough money to save the farm and secure his financial future for years to come. "I'm not selling," Tom said firmly when Eleanor expressed concern about the offer. "Whatever this is, it doesn't just belong to me. It's part of a bigger story that needs to be told properly." His decision was solidified the next morning when a package arrived from a museum curator in Oklahoma. Inside was a photograph of a similar box discovered on Cherokee land in 1986, but never successfully opened. The accompanying letter explained that stories about such containers had persisted in tribal oral traditions for generations, but without physical evidence, they had been classified as legends rather than history. "It's happening exactly as the documents described," Sophia said excitedly. "The discovery of one node activates interest in the others. The network is revealing itself." Within weeks, reports began coming in from across the country, similar containers discovered in locations, ranging from the Appalachian Mountains to the desert southwest. Each site corresponded to places marked on a map included in the Willow Creek documents, and each contained pieces of the larger technological system that the Keepers had created and hidden. Tom's farm became the de facto headquarters for what the academic community was now calling the Confluence Project, a collaborative research initiative bringing together historians, archaeologists, indigenous knowledge keepers, and scientists from diverse fields. The university arranged to lease a portion of the farm for the research facility, providing Tom with enough income to resolve his financial problems while keeping ownership of his ancestral land. Bailey, unsurprisingly, became something of a celebrity. Researchers observed that she could consistently detect the energy patterns associated with the hidden technology, leading them to discover additional artifacts buried around the oak grove. Other animals at sites across the country demonstrated similar abilities, confirming the document's claims about certain creatures being naturally attuned to the energy systems the technology was designed to work with. 6 months after Bailey's initial discovery, Tom stood by the oak grove, watching as a team of researchers used the restored disk device to map the living currents flowing through his land. The technology, functioning again after nearly 3 centuries, revealed patterns of energy that aligned perfectly with the farm's most fertile areas, knowledge that Tom could now use to revitalize his agricultural practices. "Your grandfather was right all along," Eleanor said, joining him with Bailey at her side. "The land does remember, and it chose the right people to share its memories with." Tom nodded, watching as Bailey moved confidently among the researchers, occasionally guiding them with a nudge or meaningful look when their instruments needed adjustment. The dog, who had once been simply his loyal companion, was now recognized as something more, a bridge between human understanding and the deeper awareness embedded in the land itself. "The keepers knew what they were doing," he said quietly. "They didn't just hide their knowledge. They made sure it would be found when it was needed most by people who would use it responsibly." As the sun set over Willow Creek Farm, painting the research facility and the ancient oak grove in golden light, Tom realized that his family's connection to this land had always been about more than just agriculture. For generations, the Wilsons had been unwitting guardians of something precious, a hidden history waiting to be rediscovered, a different way of understanding the relationship between technology and nature. And it had taken the persistent digging of one extraordinary dog to finally bring that truth to light, changing not just Tom's future, but our understanding of the past forever. The network of discoveries spread across the country like ripples in a pond. Each new container that surfaced brought its own revelations, its own piece of the technological puzzle that the keepers had so carefully hidden. But Willow Creek Farm remained the nexus, the first discovery and the most complete repository of knowledge. 8 months after Bailey's initial discovery, Willow Creek Farm was unrecognizable. The university had constructed a state-of-the-art research facility where the North Field had once struggled to produce corn. The weathered barn had been renovated into a conference center where scholars from around the world gathered to share findings. Even the farmhouse had been transformed, with Tom's kitchen now serving as an informal gathering place where researchers and indigenous knowledge keepers would share meals and exchange theories late into the night. But the heart of the operation remained the oak grove. Something about those ancient trees, their deep roots, their connection to the land, had made this the perfect place to hide the container for centuries. And it was here, under the spreading branches, that the team had set up their most sensitive equipment to study what they now called the resonance. "The resonance is strongest here," Dr. Sophia Chen explained to a newly arrived group of researchers. "The frequency patterns match exactly what's described in the Stillwell documents. It's as if the trees themselves are amplifying a signal coming from deep within the earth." Sophia had become the project's resident expert on the language systems used by the keepers. What had initially appeared to be a mixture of European and indigenous writing systems had revealed itself to be something far more sophisticated, a deliberately constructed communication method designed to encode multiple layers of meaning. "It's not just a language," she would explain. "It's a mathematical system, a mapping technology, and a scientific notation all in one." They created a way to describe natural energy systems with a precision that we're only just beginning to match with our modern instruments. Tom stood at the edge of the grove, watching the activity with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. His modest farm had become the center of what some were calling the most significant historical discovery of the century. The financial troubles that had once threatened to cost him his heritage were now a distant memory. the university's lease. Agreement provided more than enough income to repair the remaining farm buildings and implement the sustainable agriculture methods that the documents had revealed. Ancient techniques merged with modern understanding. Bailey trotted up to him, her Border Collie instinct still evident in the way she monitored the activity around the farm. But she was no longer just Tom's working dog. The research team had confirmed what Tom had always suspected. Bailey possessed an unusual sensitivity to the electromagnetic fields generated by the buried technology. Tests had shown that her brain activity changed when she was near active artifacts, her sensory perception extending into ranges that human instruments could barely detect. "There you are, girl," Tom said, scratching behind her ears. "Checking up on our guests?" Bailey's attention suddenly shifted, her ears perking up as she stared intently toward the farm's entrance. Moments later, Tom heard the sound of approaching vehicles, not the usual university cars or research vans, but something heavier, more official. "What now?" he muttered, starting toward the driveway with Bailey at his heels. 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled up in front of the farmhouse. Men and women in suits emerged, led by a tall, stern-looking woman in her 50s who surveyed the research complex with calculating eyes. Robert hurried over to join Tom, his expression concerned. "Federal agents," he said quietly. "I was afraid this might happen. Once the Oklahoma site confirmed the energy readings, it was only a matter of time before someone in Washington took notice." The woman approached them, presenting credentials that identified her as Dr. Lydia Chambers, Special Science Advisor to the Department of Energy. "Mr. Wilson, Professor Daniels, I'd like to discuss your research operation here." Tom straightened, his shoulders acutely aware that he was facing a government official in his mud-spattered work boots and faded flannel shirt. "This is private property, Dr. Chambers. The university has all the necessary permits and permissions for their work." "I'm not here to shut you down, Mr. Wilson," Dr. Chambers said, her tone softening slightly. "Quite the opposite. What you've discovered here has significant implications for national security and energy policy. My team has been monitoring the publications coming out of your project with great interest." Robert stepped forward. "The Confluence Project operates on principles of open scientific inquiry and cultural respect. The indigenous partners in our research have equal standing in determining how this knowledge is shared, which is precisely why I'm here in person, rather than sending in a team with requisition orders," Chambers replied. "We're proposing a partnership, not a takeover. The energy systems you're mapping could revolutionize our understanding of sustainable power generation, but they could also be weaponized if they fell into the wrong hands." Bailey growled softly, positioning herself between Tom and the newcomers. The dog's reaction wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakably protective. Dr. Chambers glanced down at the Border Collie with raised eyebrows. "This must be the famous Bailey. Our analysts were initially skeptical about the reports of animal sensitivity to the energy fields, but the data is quite compelling." "Bailey found the first container," Tom said simply. "She's been part of this from the beginning." "May I?" Chambers asked, extending her hand toward Bailey. Tom nodded, though he noticed that Bailey maintained her alert posture as the government scientist carefully approached. What happened next would later be described in countless scientific papers and eventually declassified government reports. As Dr. Chambers reached out to Bailey, the medallion she wore beneath her blouse slipped out, a simple silver disc on a chain. Bailey's reaction was immediate and astonishing. She lunged forward, not aggressively but with clear purpose, and touched her nose directly to the medallion. The disc began to glow with the now familiar blue light, and Chambers froze in shock. That's impossible," she whispered. "This was my grandmother's. It's been in my family for generations." Tom and Robert exchanged glances. Dr. Chambers, Robert said carefully, would you mind telling us exactly where your family is from? The revelation that followed would add yet another dimension to the already extraordinary story of the keepers. Dr. Lydia Chambers was a direct descendant of Elizabeth Chambers, mentioned in the Stillwell documents as one of the original keepers. A European woman who had married into the Cherokee Nation and helped establish the Knowledge Protection Network in the 1740s. The medallion was one of the keys, a personal identifier that would respond to the energy signatures embedded in the containers. For nearly 3 centuries, it had been passed down through generations of women in her family, its true purpose forgotten, but its importance as a family heirloom preserved. My grandmother said it would protect me, Chambers explained later. That evening, as they sat in Tom's kitchen, the government team had set up their own equipment near the oak grove, coordinating with the university researchers rather than displacing them. I never imagined, never dreamed that it was connected to something like this. Eleanor, who had been examining the medallion, looked up. The alloy composition matches the container exactly, and these markings, they complement the navigation disc we found. I think this might be what Stillwell called the harmonic key. Michael Kovacs nodded excitedly. That would explain why we haven't been able to fully activate the navigation system. The documents mentioned a harmonic resonance that required multiple components. Bailey, who had been resting at Tom's feet, suddenly stood and walked deliberately to the center of the kitchen. She looked from the medallion to the window facing the oak grove, then back at the humans, her intent clear. I think she wants us to try something, Tom said, recognizing the dog's now familiar guiding behavior. Night had fallen over Willow Creek Farm, but the research area was illuminated by floodlights. The team, now expanded to include Dr. Chambers and her colleagues, gathered at the oak grove. Bailey led them to the exact spot where she had first discovered the container, then sat expectantly. Following what seemed to be the dog's suggestion, they brought together the 3 elements: the navigation disc from the original container, Dr. Chambers' medallion, and a third component that had been discovered at the Cherokee site in Oklahoma, a small crystal cylinder that the documents described as an energy conduit. The harmonic triad, Sophia murmured, referencing Stillwell's writings. 3 components, 3 guardians, 3 places of power. When the 3 artifacts were aligned according to the patterns described in the documents, the response was immediate and dramatic. A surge of energy pulsed through the assembled components, creating a projection that hovered in the air above them, a 3-dimensional map of glowing blue lines that extended outward from their location, connecting to points across the continent. It's a complete network, Robert breathed. Not just the sites we've discovered, but dozens more. Hundreds, Michael corrected, his instruments recording the phenomenon. Look at the density of the connections. This isn't just a preservation, a system. It's a continental-scale technology. Bailey barked once, seemingly in confirmation, and moved to a specific point within the projection. As she approached one of the glowing nodes, the map zoomed in, revealing detailed topographical features of a location that appeared to be in the southwest. That's the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, one of Chambers' colleagues identified. There's nothing in our records about significant archaeological findings there. Nothing in the official records, Sophia corrected, checking the translated documents. But according to this, it's the location of what they called the confluence engine, the central mechanism that coordinates the entire network. The implications were enormous. What had begun as a curious discovery by a farmer's dog had revealed itself to be the key to an advanced technological system that spanned the continent, a harmoniously integrated network created through collaboration. between indigenous knowledge keepers and forward-thinking European scientists, hidden for centuries until the right time and the right people could rediscover it. "This changes everything," Dr. Chambers said, her official demeanor completely transformed by the wonder of what they were witnessing. "Our energy infrastructure, our understanding of history, our approach to sustainable technology, that's why they hid it," Tom said quietly, watching as Bailey moved confidently through the projection, seeming to understand its significance in ways the humans were still struggling to grasp. They knew it wasn't just about the technology itself. It was about the collaboration, the balance between different ways of understanding the world. Over the following months, expeditions were launched to each of the locations revealed by the harmonic map. Each site yielded new artifacts, new pieces of the technological system, and new historical documents that gradually filled in the extraordinary story of the Keepers. The tale that emerged was one of visionary individuals from diverse backgrounds who had recognized, even in the tumultuous 18th century, that the technological path emerging in Europe was both powerful and dangerously unbalanced, focused on domination rather than harmony, exploitation rather than sustainability. Working in secret, often at great personal risk, they had combined the emerging scientific understanding of electricity and magnetism with indigenous knowledge of natural energy systems to create something revolutionary. But they had also recognized the dangers. European colonization was advancing with brutal efficiency, and the technologies they were developing could become devastating weapons in the wrong hands. Rather than risk their work being misused, they made the difficult decision to hide it, preserving their knowledge in a network of containers placed at key energy nodes across the continent, protected by both physical isolation and a sophisticated understanding of how information persists in cultural memory. They knew it would be found eventually, Sophia explained during a presentation to a joint academic government committee. The containers were designed to preserve the artifacts indefinitely, and the network itself generates subtle energy patterns that influence both the surrounding ecosystem and the behavior of certain sensitive animals. "Like Bailey," Tom added, the Border Collie sitting attentively at his side during the formal proceedings. "Exactly," Sophia nodded. The keepers understood that certain animals, particularly dogs, with their close relationship to humans, could perceive these energy patterns. They deliberately designed the system to attract the attention of such animals, knowing that a human-animal partnership would be the most likely way their knowledge would eventually be rediscovered. The project to understand and potentially implement the Keeper's technology expanded rapidly. With government support now complementing the academic research, resources flowed into Willow Creek Farm and the other discovery sites. Tom's land became not just a research center, but a model for the practical application of the rediscovered knowledge, demonstrating how the understanding of natural energy flows could transform agricultural practices, water management, and local energy generation. Bailey's role evolved as well. Researchers studying animal cognition and sensory perception identified specific genetic markers that appeared to enhance certain animals' ability to detect the subtle energy patterns. Similar traits were found in dogs at other discovery sites, suggesting that the keepers had understood far more about animal cognition and genetic predisposition than should have been possible in their era. "It's not mystical, it's just advanced science," Eleanor explained to a group of veterinary researchers who had come to study Bailey. "These animals are perceiving very real physical phenomena that our instruments can detect now, but couldn't when the system was first hidden. The keepers understood this sensitivity and designed their technology to work with it rather than trying to replace it with mechanical sensors." For Tom, watching his farm transform into something beyond anything he could have imagined was both exhilarating and humbling. The land that had been in his family for generations had been preserving something precious all along, not just in the physical artifacts buried beneath the soil, but in the stories his grandfather had told, the connection to place that had kept the Wilsons here despite economic hardships, and the partnership with animals that had been central to the farm's operation. One evening, as summer transitioned to fall, Tom sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the research complex in golden light. Bailey lay beside him, her head on his knee, both of them taking a rare, quiet moment away from the constant activity. "We did good, didn't we, girl?" he said softly, scratching behind her ears the way she liked. Bailey looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to see more than ordinary dogs, and Tom felt a profound sense of rightness. The farm would never go back to what it had been before, but it had become something more, true to its deeper purpose, a place where different ways of knowing came together in harmony. Dr. Chambers joined them on the porch, having shed her formal government attire for more practical clothes during her extended stay at the farm. "The Arizona team just checked in," she said. "They've located the Confluence engine site. Initial readings match our predictions exactly." "Do they need Bailey?" Tom asked. The Border Collie had traveled to several of the discovery sites, her sensitivity to the energy patterns proving invaluable in locating deeply buried artifacts. "Not immediately," Chambers replied. "They're still doing preliminary surveys, but soon, yes. The engine components appear to be distributed in a complex pattern that will require her kind of sensitivity to map properly." Tom nodded. He'd grown accustomed to sharing Bailey's extraordinary abilities with the project, though he insisted on accompanying her on these expeditions. Their partnership remained at the heart of everything that had unfolded. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Chambers continued, leaning against the porch railing. "Once we've mapped the entire network, once we understand the technology well enough to implement it, this will change the world, Tom. Not just scientifically, but culturally. The story of the Keepers challenges everything we thought we knew about early American history, about the relationship between European and indigenous knowledge systems." "That's what they intended, isn't it?" Tom replied. "They didn't just hide this knowledge to preserve it. They hid it to make sure it would be found at a time when we might actually understand what they were trying to tell us." Bailey's ears perked up suddenly, and she rose to her feet, staring toward the oak grove with intense focus. Both humans followed her gaze, but could see nothing unusual in the gathering dusk. "What is it, girl?" Tom asked. Instead of barking or running toward whatever had caught her attention, Bailey simply wagged her tail as if greeting an old friend. Then she settled back down, though her eyes remained fixed on the grove. "The energy readings from the trees spike sometimes in the evening," Chambers observed. "Michael thinks it might be related to temperature changes, but you think it's something else," Tom finished for her. She nodded slowly. "The more we learn about this technology, the more I wonder if the Keepers managed to preserve more than just their knowledge. Some of the documents hint at techniques for imprinting consciousness into the energy patterns themselves." Tom considered this, watching as Bailey continued to gaze at the apparently empty grove, her expression alert but peaceful. "You think they're still here, still watching?" "I think," Chambers said carefully, "that they understood continuity in ways we're only beginning to grasp. Not immortality, not in the conventional sense, but a way of extending awareness beyond a single lifetime, embedding it into systems that could persist for centuries." The idea should have seemed far-fetched, even disturbing, but after everything they had discovered, after seeing Bailey's inexplicable ability to interact with technology that had remained hidden for centuries, Tom found himself open to possibilities that would have once seemed impossible. "My grandfather used to sit right here," he said, patting the weathered wood of the porch swing. "He'd tell stories about the spirits in the oak grove, about how the land remembered. Everyone thought he was just spinning tales, but he believed it, really believed it. Perhaps he was more sensitive than most, Chambers suggested. Not as much as Bailey, but enough to sense something. Bailey finally looked away from the grove, turning her attention back to Tom and resting her head on his knee again. Her expression seemed to hold a contentment that went beyond the simple happiness of a dog with her human. "Whatever happens next," Tom said, "whatever we discover about the Confluence engine or the rest of the network, I want to make sure we honor what the Keepers were trying to do. This wasn't just about technology. It was about finding a different way forward, a path where different kinds of knowledge work together instead of fighting each other." Chambers nodded solemnly. That's why they chose this approach. They could have tried to force their vision on the world of their time, but they chose instead to preserve it, to trust that future generations would be ready to understand what they couldn't fully implement themselves. As night fell completely over Willow Creek Farm, the lights from the research facility illuminated the scene like earthbound stars. In the oak grove, sensitive instruments continued to record the subtle energy patterns that flowed through the ancient trees, and in those patterns, if one knew how to interpret them, was embedded not just information, but intention. The echo of visionaries who had seen beyond the conflicts of their time to a possible future where harmony might prevail. Over domination, cooperation over conquest. Bailey dozed off, but even in sleep, her ears twitched occasionally toward the grove, as if listening to voices only she could hear. And perhaps she was. Perhaps the Keepers had understood, better than anyone in their time, that the bonds between humans and animals, between different cultures, between people and the land itself, were not limitations to be overcome, but connections to be cherished, the true foundation of wisdom that could sustain not just survival, but flourishing. For Tom Wilson, whose greatest worry had once been losing his family farm, the world had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. But at the center of it all remained the simple, profound partnership with the extraordinary dog who had led him to this discovery, this purpose, this place where past and future met in the potential for transformation. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new challenges, new opportunities to share what they were learning with a world desperately in need of different ways of thinking about energy, sustainability, and cooperation. But for tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, it was enough to sit on his grandfather's porch with his remarkable dog at his side, feeling the rhythms of a land that remembered and would continue to remember long after all of them were gone. The autumn winds swept across Willow Creek Farm, rustling through the ancient oak grove and carrying the scent of impending rain. In the makeshift laboratory that had once been Tom Wilson's barn, tension was mounting. For the past 3 weeks, the research team had been struggling with an unexpected development. The artifacts were changing. It had begun subtly, almost imperceptibly. The engravings on the original container found by Bailey had started to shift, the flowing patterns rearranging themselves in ways that defied explanation. The disk device, which they had partially deciphered, was now emitting energy signatures that fluctuated unpredictably. Most concerning was the effect these changes were having on their equipment. Sophisticated sensors would malfunction, computers would crash, and communications with other research sites would mysteriously fail. "It's as if the network is waking up," Michael Kovac said, reviewing the latest energy readings. "The patterns are becoming more complex, more organized, almost like a system bootstrapping itself." Sophia Chen looked up from the parchment she'd been studying, her brow furrowed with concern. According to Stilwell's writings, there was a safeguard built into the system, something he called the recognition phase. If the technology was discovered but not properly understood, it would initiate a series of tests. "Tests for what?" Tom asked, glancing at Bailey, who had been unusually restless all day, pacing around the laboratory and occasionally whining softly at the artifacts. "For worthiness," Sophia replied, her finger tracing a specific passage in the yellowed document. The keepers were afraid that their technology might be discovered by those who would misuse it, so they programmed the artifacts to evaluate those who found them. Robert Daniels, who had been monitoring a particularly erratic energy flux from the disk, turned to them with alarm. "That's not all they built in. Look at this." He pointed to a section of new engravings that had appeared overnight. "I've been comparing these to the translated sections from the Cherokee site. If I'm reading this correctly, it's a warning." The team gathered around as Robert explained his interpretation. According to the warning, the keepers had designed their technology not just to preserve knowledge, but to protect it. If those who discovered the artifacts failed to demonstrate the proper understanding and intentions, the system would reconceal itself, burying the artifacts deeper, wiping the information they had revealed, and essentially resetting until a more suitable discovery occurred. "How exactly does it judge worthiness?" Eldona asked, the practical veterinarian, in her naturally skeptical of such abstract concepts. Before anyone could answer, Bailey suddenly stood at attention, her eyes fixed on the barn door. Moments later, they heard vehicles approaching. Not the familiar sound of university cars or Dr. Chambers' government SUVs, but something heavier, more ominous. Tom moved to the window, his face hardening at what he saw. Military transport, at least 3 of them. "That's impossible," Robert said, joining him at the window. "Our agreement with the government was explicit. No military involvement, no classified research protocols." "Tell that to them," Tom replied grimly, watching as uniformed personnel began to disembark from the vehicles. Dr. Lydia Chambers arrived moments later, her own car speeding up the driveway. She intercepted the military contingent before they could approach the barn, her body language clearly communicating tension even from a distance. "Something's wrong," Eleanor observed. "Lydia looks blind-sided by this." They watched as Chambers engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with the officer in charge. Her medallion, the family heirloom that had proven to be one of the keeper's keys, glinted in the autumn sunlight as she gestured emphatically. Inside the barn, the artifacts had begun to respond to the confrontation outside. The disk device was now pulsing with blue light, its concentric rings rotating slightly with each pulse. The original container that Bailey had discovered emitted a low humming sound that seemed to resonate with the wooden beams of the old structure. Bailey growled softly, positioning herself between the team and the door, her protective instincts clearly triggered by both the artifact's reaction and the unwelcome arrivals. "We need to secure everything," Robert said, already moving to gather their most important findings. "Whatever's happening, we can't risk military oversight of this technology. The implications could be disastrous." Tom placed a reassuring hand on Bailey's head, though his own concern was evident. "The Oak Grove," he said suddenly, a realization dawning. "If they're going to try to seize control of the research, that's where we need to go. The energy signatures have always been strongest." There, the decision was made quickly, with the team gathering only the most essential artifacts and documentation. Using a rear exit from the barn, they made their way toward the Oak Grove, Bailey leading the way with determined purpose. Behind them, they could hear Dr. Chambers' voice rising in continued protest as the military personnel began to approach the research facilities. The ancient trees of the grove seemed to welcome them, the space between their massive trunks oddly sheltered despite the open landscape. Bailey moved directly to the spot where she had first discovered the container, sitting down and looking expectantly at Tom. "Now what?" Michael asked, glancing nervously back toward the barn where the confrontation was escalating. As if in answer, The artifacts they had brought began to activate simultaneously. The disc device floated from Robert's hands, hovering a few feet above the ground. The smaller components they had collected from other sites moved to form a circle around. It and Dr. Chambers' medallion, which Eleanor had been safeguarding in her absence, rose to position itself directly above the disc. "It's creating a resonance field," Sophia whispered, recognition dawning in her eyes, just like Stillwell described in his account of the Keeper's council gatherings. The blue light emanating from the artifacts expanded, forming a dome of shimmering energy that encompassed the entire grove. Outside its boundary, they could see military personnel approaching, Dr. Chambers still attempting to intervene. But when the soldiers reached the edge of the light, they stopped abruptly, as if encountering an invisible barrier. "And they can't see us," Michael realized, watching as the confused personnel circled the grove. "The resonance field is bending light around us somehow." Bailey barked once, drawing their attention back to the center of the grove, where the floating artifacts had begun to project images into the air. Unlike the simple maps or technical diagrams they had seen before, these projections showed people, the keepers themselves, gathered in what appeared to be a similar grove centuries ago. The images solidified, becoming almost tangible, and then the impossible happened. One of the figures, a woman dressed in colonial-era clothing that matched descriptions of Elizabeth Chambers, stepped forward, her form translucent but undeniably present. "You face the challenge that we feared," the apparition said, her voice somehow both distant and clear. "Those who would control rather than understand, those who see power rather than harmony." Tom stepped forward, Bailey at his side. "What is this? Are you real?" The figure smiled gently. "In a manner of speaking, we are echoes, imprints preserved within the network itself, not consciousness as you understand it, but memory given form through the technology we created." "The recognition phase," Sophia breathed, understanding dawning. "This is the test." Elizabeth nodded. "The network evaluates those who discover it. It has been watching you all. Your actions, your intentions, your understanding. Now it must determine whether this revelation should proceed, or whether our knowledge must once again be hidden until a more suitable time." As she spoke, other figures appeared beside her, the original keepers from different backgrounds and traditions, each regarding the modern research team with solemn intensity. "Your world stands at a crossroads," said another figure identified by his clothing and demeanor as Jonathan Stillwell. "The technologies you have begun to uncover could heal the damage done to the living systems of the Earth, or they could be weaponized, continuing the cycle of domination and exploitation that we sought to interrupt." Outside the Dome of Light, the military personnel had been joined by more vehicles and equipment. They appeared to be setting up some kind of scanning technology, attempting to penetrate the invisible barrier that protected the grove. "They're not going to give up," Eleanor said, watching the activity with concern. "Whatever triggered this military interest, it's serious. The network detected a breach in your security protocols," Elizabeth explained. "Your government's defense systems intercepted some of your communications about the energy generation potential of our technology. Those who seek centralized control were bound to take notice eventually." "What do we do?" Tom asked, instinctively placing his hand on Bailey's head, drawing comfort from her solid presence amid these impossible apparitions. "You must make a choice," Stillwell replied. "The network has evaluated your group and found genuine understanding, a true commitment to the principles of harmony and balance that we valued. But it has also detected the approach of forces that would corrupt our vision." Elizabeth stepped closer, her translucent form now directly addressing Tom. "We built in a contingency for this situation, a protocol that would remove the technology from those who would misuse it, while preserving the connection with those who truly understand." Remove it how? Robert asked, his scientific mind struggling to process the apparent impossibility of communicating with these historical figures. By shifting it through time, another keeper explained, not the physical artifacts themselves, those are merely access points, but the core network, the actual technology that they connect. To, it can be advanced forward, beyond the reach of those who seek to control it now. The implications were staggering. The keepers hadn't just created a sophisticated technology, they had somehow developed a method of projecting it through time itself, ensuring that it would only become fully accessible when humanity was ready. If we do this, Tom said slowly, what happens to everything we've discovered? The documents, the knowledge about the keepers themselves? That remains, Elizabeth assured him. The historical record, the story of what we attempted, that belongs to your time. But the functional technology, the network itself, would advance beyond current reach. Those who understand, those like you, would maintain a connection, a bridge to its eventual return. Bailey suddenly raised her head, her attention focused on something beyond the dome of light. Through the shimmering barrier, they could see Dr. Chambers running toward the grove, pursued by military personnel. Unlike the others, she seemed able to perceive the energy dome, heading directly toward it with determination. She carries the bloodline key, Stillwell observed. Her connection cannot be severed as easily as the others. As Dr. Chambers reached the boundary of the dome, Bailey moved to the edge, barking encouragingly. The barrier shimmered and parted, allowing her to slip through before resealing behind her. She stumbled into the grove, breathless and alarmed. They've classified the entire project, she gasped, regaining her balance. Executive order from levels I didn't even know existed. They're calling it a national security priority, planning to dismantle the university research and transfer everything to a military facility. She froze as she noticed the translucent figures surrounding them, her eyes widening in recognition. "Grandmother Elizabeth," she whispered, instinctively touching the medallion at her throat. "The choice must be made now," Elizabeth said, her form beginning to flicker as the military's scanning equipment intensified its efforts to penetrate the barrier. "The network can be advanced beyond their reach, but all of you who are connected to it must choose to maintain that connection." "What does that mean exactly?" Eleanor asked, the practical question grounding them amid the surreal situation. "Your awareness would be linked to the network as it moves forward in time," Stillwell explained. "You would remain in your present, but with a consciousness partially extended into the future point where the technology resurfaces. A bridge between times." The military had begun to deploy more sophisticated equipment, the dome of energy fluctuating as their scanning intensified. They didn't have long to decide. Tom looked at Bailey, who returned his gaze with that uncanny intelligence that had started this entire journey. "What do you think, girl? Ready for one more adventure?" Bailey's tail wagged once, decisively, and she moved to stand beside the hovering artifacts at the center of the grove. "She's already chosen," Elizabeth observed with a smile. "Animals exist more fluidly in time than humans do. She perceives the connection naturally." One by one, the research team made their decision, moving to join Bailey in the center of the grove. Dr. Chambers was the last, her scientific training warring briefly with the undeniable evidence of her ancestral connection to this phenomenon. "My whole career, I've searched for rational explanations," she said, fingering the medallion that had been passed down through generations of her family. "But some part of me always knew there was more to this than just an heirloom." She stepped forward, completing the circle around the hovering artifacts. "The connection is established," Elizabeth announced, her form and those of the other keepers beginning to merge with the shimmering energy of the dome. "The network will now advance beyond current reach, but your awareness will maintain the bridge. When humanity is ready, truly ready, You will help guide the technology's return." The hovering artifacts began to spin, faster and faster, the blue light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Bailey barked once, the sound somehow echoing both within the grove and across a vast distance that felt more temporal than spatial. Outside the dome, the military personnel had finally activated their most powerful scanning technology. The barrier flickered, beginning to destabilize under the assault. "Now!" Stillwell's voice commanded as the Keeper's forms dissolved completely into the whirling energy. The world seemed to shift around them, reality itself bending as the network initiated its extraordinary contingency protocol. For a moment that felt both instantaneous and eternal, the research team experienced a profound expansion of awareness, their consciousness stretching forward through time, creating anchors in a future point where the Keeper's technology would fully re-emerge. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon subsided. The dome of blue light faded, the hovering artifacts gently descended to the ground, and the grove returned to apparent normalcy. The military personnel, suddenly able to access the area, rushed in with weapons drawn, only to find nothing but a research team standing around what appeared to be interesting but ordinary archaeological artifacts. The scanning equipment detected no unusual energy signatures, no extraordinary phenomena. "Dr. Chambers," the officer in charge addressed her formally. "By executive order, this entire research project has been classified. All materials and findings are to be transferred to secure facilities immediately." Chambers nodded calmly, exchanging a knowing glance with Tom and the others. "Of course, Colonel. We'll cooperate fully, though I think you'll find these artifacts are primarily of historical rather than technological significance." As the military began cataloging and securing the physical artifacts, the research team maintained their composed demeanor, revealing nothing of what had just occurred. Only Bailey's occasionally perked ears and intent gaze into seemingly empty air hinted at the extraordinary connection that had been established. That evening, as the last of the military transport vehicles departed with the confiscated artifacts and documentation, Tom sat on his porch with Bailey beside him. Dr. Chambers and the core research team had joined him, all of them experiencing the strange dual awareness that the connection with the advanced network had created. "I can feel it," Eleanor said wonderingly. "Not clearly, but like remembering something that hasn't happened yet." "The network exists now in a future point," Sophia explained, her understanding enhanced by the connection. "But we're linked to it across time. We'll help prepare the way for when it fully returns. This day. They can take the artifacts," Robert added with quiet satisfaction. "But the real technology, the network itself, that's beyond their reach now." Bailey suddenly raised her head, looking out toward the oak grove with intense focus. The others followed her gaze, and for a moment in the gathering dusk, they could perceive faint outlines of blue light tracing patterns between the ancient trees. The visible echo of connections that now spanned not just space, but time itself. "So what now?" Tom asked, absently scratching behind Bailey's ears as he contemplated the strange new reality they inhabited. "Now," Dr. Chambers replied, her scientist's practicality merging with her newfound connection to her ancestors' vision, "we continue the work. Not with the artifacts themselves, those will likely disappear into some government warehouse, but with the understanding we've gained. The principles of harmony and balance that the Keepers valued can be implemented, even without the physical technology. And we prepare," Michael added. "The connection works both ways. We're not just reaching forward in time. The future point is reaching back to us. Information, understanding, guidance. It will come through the bridge we've established." Bailey wagged her tail in apparent agreement, her canine perception of the temporal connection seemingly more natural and complete than the humans could achieve. As night fell over Willow Creek Farm, the group sat in companionable silence, each processing the extraordinary transformation they had undergone. They were no longer just researchers studying historical artifacts. They had become living links in a chain that stretched across centuries, from the original keepers through their own time and forward to a future point where humanity might finally be ready to embrace the vision of harmony that had been preserved for so long. Tom looked out at his farm, still his home, still his heritage, but now also something more. The land that had supported generations of his family had turned out to be protecting something far more valuable than crops. It had been guarding a possibility, a different path for human development that had been temporarily diverted, but not abandoned. "You know what's strange?" he said after a while. "I was so worried about losing this farm, about being the Wilson, who finally failed. But now it feels like every generation of my family was just helping to preserve this place until the right moment. Like we were all part of something bigger without even knowing it." The keepers understood that, Sophia nodded. They knew that some knowledge needs to be carried through time, not just in books or artifacts, but in places, in bloodlines, in connections to the land itself. Bailey suddenly stood, her attention drawn to a point beyond the porch. In the darkness of the farm, small points of blue light had begun to appear. Tiny manifestations of the temporal connection, visible only to those who shared in the bridge consciousness. "She sees them more clearly than we do," Eleanor observed, watching as Bailey tracked the moving lights with evident fascination. "Animals experience time differently," Dr. Chambers explained, "less linearly, more holistically. It's why the keepers incorporated them into their system in the first place. Bailey isn't just sensing the connection, she's naturally attuned to it." As if to confirm this assessment, Bailey looked back at the humans, her expression somehow conveying both patience and encouragement, as if reassuring them that they too would learn to navigate this new awareness. The lights gradually spread across the farm, forming patterns that corresponded to the natural energy flows of the land. To outside observers, Willow Creek Farm would appear ordinary, but to those connected to the network, it had become a living map of possibilities, a place where past, present, and future converged in harmonious potential. "We should start planning," Robert said, his academic mind already organizing the new reality into manageable projects. "The military has the artifacts, but we have the understanding. We can continue our research just more discreetly. And we need to find the others," Sophia added. "The documents mentioned keepers' descendants scattered across the world, people like Lydia carrying connections they might not even be aware of." "Bailey can help with that," Tom said confidently. "She found the first container, and she can sense the energy patterns better than any of our instruments. If there are other connections out there, she'll lead us to them." Bailey wagged her tail in apparent agreement, her Border Collie instincts for gathering and connecting now expanded to encompass this extraordinary new purpose. As the group continued their discussion, making plans for this new phase of their journey, the blue lights gradually coalesced around the oak grove, forming a shimmering pattern that mirrored the stars above. The ancient trees that had guarded the keeper's legacy for centuries now served as anchors for something even more remarkable. A bridge across time itself, connecting a vision from the past to its potential fulfillment in the future. For Tom, Wilson, whose greatest concern had once been merely keeping his family farm, the world had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet at the center of this transformation remained the simple, profound partnership with the extraordinary dog who had started it all. Bailey, whose perception had extended beyond the limitations of human awareness to discover a forgotten possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explaining the military's confiscation of their research, finding ways to continue their work without the physical artifacts, learning to navigate their strange new awareness. But for tonight, sitting on his grandfather's porch with his remarkable dog beside him and these newfound companions sharing in an extraordinary connection, Tom felt a sense of purpose that transcended the struggles that had once consumed him. The farm had been saved, but that was now the least of what had been accomplished. Something much older, much more profound had been preserved, a vision of harmony that had been carefully shepherded through time by generations of keepers, waiting for the moment when humanity might be ready to choose a different path. And, while that moment might still lie in the future, the bridge had been established. The connection was secure. The journey had begun. Bailey rested her head on Tom's knee, her eyes reflecting the subtle blue lights that only they could see, and together they gazed out at the transformed landscape of Willow Creek Farm, no longer just a place of earth and crops and struggling livelihood, but a nexus point in a network that spanned both distance and time itself. The keeper's legacy was safe. Different than they had planned, perhaps, but preserved nonetheless. Not in artifacts that could be seized and sequestered, but in connections that transcended the limitations of physical reality, in consciousness extended across time, in partnership between species, in harmony with the living world, and in the quiet determination of one extraordinary dog who had led her human partner to a discovery that changed everything. 1 year had passed since the military had seized the physical artifacts from Willow Creek Farm. 1 year since the keeper's technology had advanced itself beyond current reach, leaving behind only the temporal bridge that connected Tom, Bailey, and their companions to its future emergence. The world had continued its ordinary rhythms, unaware of the extraordinary potential that had been temporarily withdrawn from the present moment. To outside observers, Willow Creek Farm appeared to have returned to normal agricultural operations. The research tents were gone, the university equipment removed, the steady flow of excited academics and government officials reduced to occasional visits from Dr. Chambers, who maintained her position within the Department of Energy while secretly coordinating what remained of the Confluence Project. But beneath this appearance of normalcy, profound transformations were unfolding. The temporal connection had continued to develop, gradually strengthening as those linked to the network learned to navigate their expanded awareness. What had begun as fleeting impressions, glimpses of blue light, momentary sensations of knowledge from a future point, had evolved into something more substantial and controllable. Tom stood in the center of the oak grove, eyes closed, Bailey sitting attentively at his side. It was dawn, the first light filtering through the ancient branches, dew still clinging to the grass beneath their feet. This had become their daily practice, a time of connection when the temporal bridge seemed strongest. "Ready, girl?" Tom asked softly. Bailey wagged her tail once, then grew still, her consciousness seemingly extending outward, just as Tom allowed his own awareness to expand along the temporal connection. The sensation was still difficult to describe, not quite like seeing or hearing, but a direct perception of information flowing across the bridge from that future point where the keeper's technology had relocated itself. Today, the impressions were particularly clear. Tom perceived patterns of energy flowing through the land beneath his feet, subtle currents that corresponded to the health and vitality of the soil, the groundwater, the microorganisms that sustained all larger life. Without the physical artifacts, they couldn't directly interact with these energy flows as the keepers had once done. But the awareness itself had proven remarkably valuable. Over the past year, Tom had transformed his agricultural practices based on this perception, rather than fighting against the natural patterns of the land, as conventional farming often did. He had learned to work in harmony with them, planting crops where the energy flows were strongest for particular species, timing harvests to align with natural cycles, allowing certain areas to remain wild when the patterns indicated their importance for the overall balance. The results had been remarkable. Willow Creek Farm was thriving in ways that defied conventional agricultural understanding. Crop yields had increased while using fewer external inputs. The soil was visibly regenerating, becoming richer and more vibrant each season. Even the local weather patterns seemed to have stabilized, the farm experiencing fewer of the extreme fluctuations that had once threatened Tom's livelihood. Bailey suddenly shifted her attention, breaking Tom's concentration. She was looking toward the farm's entrance, ears perked forward in alert anticipation. "What is it, girl?" Tom asked, though he already knew. Bailey's perception along the temporal bridge had always been sharper than any human's, more immediate, more instinctive. Minutes later, he heard vehicles approaching, not the ominous heavy transports of the military this time, but the familiar sound of Dr. Chambers' SUV, accompanied by several other cars. The visitors they had been expecting had arrived. "Right on time," Tom said to Bailey as they made their way from the grove toward the farmhouse. "You sensed them before they even turned onto the county road, didn't you?" Bailey trotted alongside him, her Border Collie energy tempered by the calm confidence she had developed through their work with the temporal connection. She was no longer just an extraordinarily perceptive dog. She had become something for which human language had no adequate term. A consciousness that moved fluidly between animal awareness and the expanded perception granted by the bridge. Dr. Lydia Chambers emerged from her vehicle, followed by individuals from across the country, all of them connected in some way to the Keeper's legacy. There was Maria Whitefeather, whose ancestors had been among the indigenous partners in the original collaboration. David Chen, a physicist whose research into non-conventional energy systems had led him to independently discover principles similar to those the Keepers had understood. And Jacob Turner, a 19-year-old whose remarkable ability to perceive energy patterns had manifested after he encountered one of the containers shortly before the military confiscation. Most significant was the newest arrival, Dr. Emily Rosewood, a geneticist whose work on interspecies communication had recently brought her to their attention. She stepped from her car and immediately dropped to one knee as Bailey approached, extending her hand with respect rather than condescension. "Hello, there," she said softly, meeting the Border Collie's intelligent gaze directly. "You must be Bailey. I've heard remarkable things about you." Bailey studied the newcomer intently, then gave a soft whine of approval, pressing her head against Dr. Rosewood's hand in a gesture that those familiar with her had learned to recognize as acceptance. "She likes you," Tom observed, extending his hand to the scientist after she stood. "That's usually a good sign." "Animals often recognize when they're truly being seen," Dr. Rosewood replied, shaking his hand warmly. "Not just observed as specimens or treated as pets, but acknowledged as conscious beings with their own valid perspectives." The group gathered in the renovated farmhouse kitchen, now modified to accommodate these periodic summit meetings of what they had come to call the Temporal Bridge Initiative. Maps covered one wall, marking locations across the continent where traces of the Keeper's presence had been identified. Another wall displayed complex diagrams representing their developing understanding of how the temporal connection functioned. "The military is still investigating," Dr. Chambers reported once everyone had settled around the large oak table. "They've assembled a team of scientists at a facility in Nevada to study the confiscated artifacts, but according to my sources, they're making minimal progress. Without the temporal connection, the artifacts appear interesting but largely inert. And they have no idea what really happened," Michael Kovacs added with a hint of satisfaction. He had maintained his university position while secretly continuing his research into the Keeper's technology. "The most advanced theoretical physicists in the government are completely baffled by the energy signatures they recorded just before everything went quiet. Which gives us the space we need to continue our work," Sophia Chen noted. She had compiled translations of all the documentary evidence they had gathered before the confiscation, preserving the historical knowledge even as the functional technology had been advanced beyond reach. The question is, what exactly are we preparing for? The temporal impressions are becoming clearer, but the timeline for the technology's return remains elusive. All eyes turned to Tom and Bailey, who had emerged as the most adept at navigating the temporal bridge. The farmer and his dog had developed a synchronicity in their perception that allowed them to access more coherent information than the others could achieve individually. "It's not a fixed point," Tom explained, attempting to articulate perceptions that existed at the edge of conventional language. "The future emergence isn't predetermined. It depends on conditions being right, on enough of the preparatory work being completed." Bailey made a soft sound of agreement, moving to the center of the group where everyone could see her. Over the past year, they had developed methods of working with her unique form of communication, not attempting to force her into human language patterns, but rather creating a middle ground where her perceptions could be shared. Dr. Rosewood watched with fascination as Bailey began what looked to outsiders like an ordinary display of canine intelligence, touching specific points on the maps, indicating particular documents, even using her paw to draw simple patterns on the specially designed tactile board they had created for her. But to those connected through the temporal bridge, it was far more profound. Bailey's movements corresponded to flows of information across the bridge, her physical actions serving as anchors for impressions that existed beyond conventional sensory perception. "She's showing us the next phase," Eleanor interpreted, having become particularly skilled at understanding Bailey's communications. "The network wants us to focus on finding more of the individuals with natural sensitivity, people like Jacob, who can perceive energy patterns without technological assistance." Jacob Turner, the youngest member of their group, nodded in understanding. His discovery of his unusual perceptual abilities had been accidental, a strange experience at a historical site in Colorado that had later been identified as one of the Keeper's nodes. "The impressions I get suggest that the technology isn't meant to create the sensitivity," he offered. "It's designed to work with abilities that already exist naturally in some humans and many animals." "Which aligns perfectly with my research," Dr. Rosewood added, her scientific enthusiasm evident. "I've been documenting neurological patterns in various species that show unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. The distribution isn't random. It follows genetic markers that appear to have been deliberately cultivated over many generations." "Cultivated by whom?" Robert Daniels asked, the historian still struggling at times with implications that stretched the boundaries of conventional academic understanding. "By the Keepers," Sophia answered simply. "The documents suggest they understood genetic principles centuries before Mendel's work became known. They didn't just hide their technology, they prepared the groundwork for its eventual return by ensuring that humans and animals with the necessary perceptual abilities would be present when the time came." Bailey barked once, sharply, drawing their attention back to the center of the room. She moved to Tom's side, looking up at him expectantly. "She wants to show us something," Tom said, recognizing the familiar signal, something new coming through the bridge. The group followed as Tom and Bailey led them out of the farmhouse and toward the oak grove. The morning had advanced, sunlight now filtering strongly through the branches, creating dappled patterns on the ground beneath. Bailey moved with purpose to the exact spot where she had first discovered the original container, sitting down and looking up at the humans with clear expectation. "What do we do?" Dr. Rosewood asked, new to these direct interactions with the temporal bridge. "Just open your awareness," Tom advised. "Don't try to force it or direct it. Just allow the perception to come through." As they stood in a circle in the ancient grove, a remarkable phenomenon began to unfold. At first, it was barely perceptible. A subtle shimmer in the air, a sense of presence that transcended ordinary awareness. Then gradually it strengthened. Patterns of blue light similar to those they had seen during the advancement event began to form. Not as solid as physical objects, but more substantial than mere hallucinations. Bailey stood and moved through these patterns with confident familiarity, her movements somehow enhancing and clarifying what the humans were perceiving. Through the temporal bridge, information flowed more coherently than ever before, not just impressions or glimpses, but structured knowledge about how the Keeper's technology interfaced with living systems. "It's showing us how to prepare," Maria Whitefeather said softly, her indigenous heritage giving her a framework for understanding that bridged traditional and scientific perspectives. Not just intellectually, but physically, how to cultivate the conditions in the land itself, in our communities, in our relationship with other species. The projected patterns gradually coalesced into a comprehensive map, not just of physical locations, but of relationships. It showed connections between certain places, certain bloodlines, certain animals, and certain moments in time. The Keepers had created not just a technology, but an entire system of harmony that encompassed all these elements. This is why the military will never understand what they've found, Dr. Chambers observed with quiet satisfaction. They're looking for weapons or energy sources, discrete technologies that can be controlled and deployed. But the actual system is embedded in relationships that can't be extracted or monopolized. As the projection faded, the group remained in the grove, processing what they had been shown. Bailey moved from person to person, seemingly checking on their well-being after the intense experience, offering her presence as an anchor for those who might be struggling to integrate the expanded perception. "So our work now is to prepare the ground," Tom summarized, looking around at his companions, "not just here at Willow Creek, but at all the nodes across the country, to cultivate the conditions that will allow for the technology's return." "It's more than that," Dr. Rosewood said, her scientific mind already integrating the new information with her existing research. "We need to find and connect with the animals and people who carry the genetic markers for perceptual sensitivity. They're key to the whole system. And we need to document everything," Robert added, the historian in him recognizing the importance of preserving this knowledge regardless of what the future might hold. "Create records that can survive even if our direct work is interrupted again." Bailey barked in apparent agreement, her tail wagging with enthusiasm for this comprehensive approach. The meeting continued throughout the day, plans being formed and responsibilities distributed among the growing network of those connected to the Keeper's legacy. By evening, as the visitors prepared to depart, a clear path forward had emerged, not a rigid blueprint, but a flexible framework that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining its essential purpose. As Tom and Bailey stood on the porch, watching the last of the vehicles disappear down the farm's driveway, the Border Collie leaned comfortably against her human companion's leg. Together, they had journeyed from a struggling farmer and his working dog to central figures in a multi-generational effort to preserve and eventually reintegrate knowledge that could transform humanity's relationship with the living world. "We've come a long way from worrying about bank foreclosures, haven't we, girl?" Tom said softly, scratching behind Bailey's ears. Bailey looked up at him, her expression somehow conveying both the simple affection of a dog for her human and the profound connection they now shared through the temporal bridge. In her eyes, Tom could see a reflection of possibilities that extended far beyond their individual lives, the continuation of work begun centuries ago by visionaries who had trusted that someday humanity would be ready to choose harmony over exploitation, The farm stretched out before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset. The fields that had once been parched and struggling now flourished with diverse crops planted according to the energy patterns Bailey had helped Tom perceive. The old barn had been repurposed as a center for teaching regenerative agriculture principles to farmers from across the region. Even the oak grove seemed more vibrant, the ancient trees responding to the renewed awareness of their importance. In the larger system, in the distance, Tom could see faint traces of blue light moving across the landscape, visible manifestations of the temporal connection that now infused Willow Creek Farm. To outside observers, it appeared to be nothing more than a remarkably successful example of sustainable agriculture. But to those who shared in the bridge consciousness, it was something far more significant. A node in an emerging network of places and people preparing for the return of knowledge that could help heal the damaged relationship between human civilization and the living systems that sustained it. Bailey suddenly perked up her ears, her attention drawn to something beyond ordinary human perception. Tom had learned to trust these moments, to recognize them as indications that information was flowing strongly across the temporal bridge. "What is it, girl?" he asked softly. "What are you sensing?" The Border Collie turned to look at him, and in that moment, through their shared connection, Tom perceived a glimpse of what she was seeing. Not just the present farm with its regenerating fields and ancient grove, but overlaid impressions of both past and future. The original keepers gathering in this same spot centuries ago, their vision extending forward through time. And a future moment when the technology would fully return, when the preparations they were now making would come to fruition. The impression faded as quickly as it had come, but it left behind a profound sense of purpose and continuity. Whatever challenges might lie ahead, whether from government interference, public skepticism, or the sheer difficulty of the task they had undertaken, they were not working in isolation. They were part of a lineage that stretched across time itself, their efforts connected to those who had come before and those who would follow. As darkness settled over Willow Creek Farm, lights came on in the farmhouse windows, creating a warm glow that spoke of home and belonging. Bailey nudged Tom's hand gently, reminding him that despite the extraordinary nature of their journey, the rhythms of daily life continued. Dinner needed preparing, evening chores awaited. The simple comforts of their partnership remained the foundation for everything else. Together, they turned toward the house, the farmer and his remarkable dog walking side by side as they had countless times before. But now each step was taken with the awareness that they moved not just across the physical landscape of Willow Creek Farm, but along a path that connected past, present, and future in a continuous flow of purpose and possibility. The extraordinary discovery that Bailey had made, digging persistently at that spot near the oak grove until Tom finally paid attention, had not just saved a struggling farm. It had revealed a forgotten wisdom, a different way of understanding humanity's place in the world. And while the physical artifacts of that wisdom had been temporarily removed from their keeping, the essential knowledge remained, preserved in their connection through the temporal bridge. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges in their preparation for the technology's eventual return. But for tonight, it was enough to be home, to feel the solid ground beneath their feet and the enduring bond between them. A simple farmer and his extraordinary dog, united in purpose that transcended the boundaries of ordinary understanding. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.